So what we're going to do is we're going to make some changes to this domain. We're going to create a managed server. So what we need to do in order to do that is switch to the domain config mbeen hierarchy. And to do that, we simply type domain config and hit enter. And then now we see the message that our location has changed to the domain that our location has changed. Okay. Now to edit in an online mode, we can't simply go off and make edits and changes right away like we did in offline mode. We actually have to get into an edit session and obtain an edit lock. So to do that, we type edit, hit enter. Now we're in an edit mbeen hierarchy. But before we can actually make an edit, we need to start an edit session using start edit. And so you can see the prompt has changed. We went from the name of the domain /edit to the name of the domain /edit with a bang or an exclamation point. This means that we are now in a session that we can edit. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to create a managed server using the create command. The create command is a WLST command that allows us to create really any type of object or resource within WebLogic. And the syntax is pretty simple. The two required arguments are, and you can see the syntax here, is the name of the resource that you're creating and the type of the resource that you're creating. So I want to create a managed server called MS1. And the type, the mbeen type is server. And you can see an example of that here where they're creating a server of the name new server. And you can see that they assigned an object to the result of that function. And that object represents the progress object, not the actual mbeen that got created. So they did get name, and they can get the name of the server, and they can get status on that. What we're going to do is we're going to run the create command and create MS1. And so quickly you get a response back saying that MS1 has been created successfully. So let's go ahead and change the listen address and listen port for that server. So what we need to do is make sure that we're in the root of this hierarchy, and you can do a cd/ just like you would on your file system, and then do an ls in here. Now what I'm looking for is the location of this server that I just created, this MS1, within the hierarchy. And you can see this hierarchy looks much different than the offline domain config hierarchy. So let's scroll down. You can see there's a servers directory. So I'm guessing MS1 is down in that servers directory. Well, there's another command that you can use to locate an mbeen or an mbeen instance, and that is find. I'm going to do help on find really quick. And you can find based on name and based on type. And either of these or all of these attributes are optional. So I'm going to do find. I'm going to pass in the name as MS1, the one I just created, and the type is server. Whoop. Need to specify the argument name, which is type equals here. Okay. So you can see that find returned all instances of server mbeans. And so you can see here that everything is pretty much derived, it looks like, off of this one down here. So there is a servers directory in our domain configuration tree, and there's another directory called MS1. So I'm assuming that this is where MS1 was created. That's a safe assumption. So let's go ahead and change to that directory and do a listing in here. Okay, this looks right. So these are all the attributes for our MS1 server, and you can see that before when we were in offline mode, we really only had files or really attributes. Now that we're in an online mode, we see that there are directories as well. So these are child mbeans for this server. And so a server mbean can have child mbeans like cluster, data source, machine, SSL, and web server. So you can link, so by default, in the grand scheme of things, in the grand hierarchy, mbeans are linked to other mbeans. And so mbeans of a certain type are linked to certain child mbeans, depending on what type they are. So for server mbeans, you can see that they are associated with these other mbean types. And so if we wanted to create an SSL configuration or a machine configuration, we would have to create an mbean type, an mbean of this type of machine or of SSL. So for now, all I want to do is update the listen address and port for this server. But one more thing I want to show you first. If we scroll down, if you recall, I mentioned that mbeans define files in an mbean tree represent either attributes or operations. So if you see down here where the permissions change from read write for an attribute to read execute, these are the operations that this server mbean supports. And over here on the right hand side, you can see what the syntax is, or the format is for specifying the parameters for that operation. Okay, so you can still use set and get, and you can still use the CMO object to set your listen address and port. I'm going to go ahead and use CMO to set my listen address. But feel free to use whichever method you'd prefer. By the way, if you're scripting this, whoops, we're going to use 8011. It's much easier to use set. Okay, go ahead and enter. Okay, so now that we're done making changes to our domain, let's go ahead and save these changes. Now, what you should do after you're done making your changes, there's a command called validate, which will validate whether or not the changes you made are valid. So we run validate, and we see that the validated changes are successful. And now once they're validated, let's go ahead and save our changes. And then once we've saved our changes, we need to activate them. So activating changes pushes all these changes out to the rest of the members of the domain. And it also releases our edit session. So you can see the prompt changed, and we don't have that bang or exclamation point. We're no longer in an edit state. Okay. So once we've made those changes, open up another terminal window and start your new managed server using the start manage WebLogic script. We haven't set up node manager for this domain, so we're just going to use the script for now. So the name of the server is ms1, and then the URL to the admin server is demoace:7011. Now, we didn't create a boot.properties file either, so go ahead and enter in the username and password.